This is Weekend Sunrise with Edwina Bartholomew and Basil Zamplis.
Good morning and welcome to what is a historic Weekend Sunrise. 45 minutes ago, the world marked perhaps the greatest feat of humankind, leaving our planet and landing on the moon. It was 6:17 a.m. Australian Eastern Time, exactly 50 years since that incredible moment when the Eagle had indeed landed, beamed around the world from Australia.
6 hours later, Neil Armstrong became the first person to walk on the lunar surface, uttering those immortal words which everyone now knows. We have special coverage live for you this morning. Let's start with Amelia Brace at the Los Angeles Observatory with the way America is marking the moment. It's been such a historic week, hasn't it, Amelia? I know you've been at the Kennedy Space Center. How is America remembering this historic day?
Yeah, it certainly has, Eddie, and there's a really festive spirit here today. There was actually a countdown across the country to mark the moment that the Eagle landed, with people toasting with the powdered drink Tang, if that brings back any memories. Perhaps the most poignant moment was at the Kennedy Space Center that you just mentioned, and that is where none other than the second man on the moon, Buzz Aldrin, returned to the exact landing pad where this all began. Now, he was joined by the Vice President Mike Pence, but also in a really emotional moment by Neil Armstrong's eldest son. And he said that this was an occasion for America to celebrate its can-do attitude. And that really is the feeling here. People are saying that this was a moment to celebrate what was a positive achievement back in a really tumultuous time for the world, but also for the United States. Now, the President, Donald Trump, has joined in the celebrations. He has used this occasion to reiterate his administration's commitment to return to the moon by 2024, and after that, to go to Mars.
Amelia, thank you. Amber Laidler is at Parkes today, remembering how our country played such a big role in that major event. Amber, good morning to you. How is Australia celebrating, and particularly the people of Parkes?
Good morning, Basil. Yes, well, it's a huge celebration here in Parkes today of the 3 tracking stations that were simultaneously receiving signals from Apollo 11. 50 years ago today, one of them was here. It was the CSIRO radio telescope here in Parkes. But it was another Australian tracking station just south of Canberra at Honeysuckle Creek that was responsible for broadcasting those first steps of Neil Armstrong on the lunar surface and broadcast those infamous words, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Now, it was around 8 minutes into the broadcast that the moon finally rose high enough to be picked up by the dish here at Parkes. And so the decision was made and the switch was made to turn on to the Parkes feed, and they stayed with the signal from Parkes for the entire 2.5 hours of the moonwalk. There are plenty of celebrations happening here today. We had a preview of the Dish movie here at the Dish last night. Plenty of astronauts, plenty of celebrations, and at that moment at 12:56 this afternoon, when those first steps were taken, we will again watch that moonwalk in live time.
They've even got the old cars there behind you as well. Thank you so much, Amelia, and Amber. We'll come back to you throughout the morning. And if you're at home, remember to where you were on that day 50 years ago. Please do share your memories with us. Much more on the anniversary throughout the morning. But let's get the rest of Sunday's news now with Sally.
Well, welcome back. Just in case you've been living under a moon rock for the past week, today is the 50th anniversary of man landing on the moon for the very first time. In fact, the Eagle had landed just an hour ago back in 1969.
And while we're looking back at that momentous achievement, there are plenty of people looking ahead at the opportunities for space exploration in the future. One of them is Federal Minister for Science and Technology, Karen Andrews, and she's in Parkes today for all of the celebrations. Good morning to you, Karen, in the shadow of the dish there. As Minister for the Australian Space Agency, you've been in talks with visiting NASA dignitaries about the role Australia can play in future space enterprises. What's come of those discussions? Any exciting announcements?
Well, good morning, and how fabulous is it to be here at Parkes with the dish right behind me. It's just wonderful. Look, and yes, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the first steps by Neil Armstrong on the moon. But in Australia, we've recently established the Australian Space Agency. So we announced that about 12 months ago. Since then, we've been working hard to establish and re-establish relationships with many of the space agencies across the world. And of course, NASA is a space agency that we have from Australia long had a connection with. from back 50 or so years ago. So what we're talking to NASA about is how Australia can engage more closely on the future work that they're undertaking. So they're working on the Artemis program now, which will be their next venture to the moon. So we're talking to them about what Australia's role may well be in that program.
And what may Australia's role be in that program, Minister?
Well, there's potentially a couple of options for us. So we're keen to engage with the International Space Station, but how wonderful would it be if we were able to at least send some equipment on the Artemis program, if we were to conduct some research from the moon in conjunction with NASA. So all of those things are on the table now. And of course, NASA will be taking more astronauts to the moon, and I'm sure that there would be many Australians who would like to be one of those astronauts.
Yeah, my word.
Minister, there are some questions around federal government funding and not adequately funding the space agency. I think there is hope that it'll be tripled, the budget from $4 billion a year to $12 billion in 2030. Is that on the cards? It sounds like a lot.
Yep. The Australian Space Agency is structured very differently to NASA. So what we are doing is working closely with industry, because we need industry to be engaged in space. So it's not just the government, it's the government and industry that will be working hard to grow the space sector from where it currently sits at $3.9 billion to $12 billion. Currently in Australia, about 10,000 people are employed in the space sector, and by 2030 there'll be an additional 20,000 people. Now, for us to be able to do that, we need industry, we need researchers working together to build those employment options.
It's a lot of money to spend, but it doesn't feel like the day to rain on that parade. So let's talk about what's happening at Parkes today. 12:56 p.m. Australian Eastern Time was the time 50 years ago that Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. What will the celebrations be like there today, and what's planned for today?
Well, there's lots of activities here, so there's certainly lots of talks. There's tours of the dish that are going to be underway, and at about 12 o'clock I think we start to kick off some of the very official discussions today. So we've got a whole range of really interesting scientists to be talking to our young people and their mums and dads and their grandparents about all things space. And of course here at CSIRO have done some magnificent work with their telescopes, so everyone's going to be really interested to hear and learn as much as they possibly can.
It is fascinating to go inside that control room. Thank you so much, Minister, for joining us on Weekend Sunrise.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward also. I believe I'm actually going to get a ride on the dish later, so I can't wait
they
for
call
that.
it a hayride, I think they do.
Thank you, Minister.
It looks like the dish they put it on the angle of where it was 50 years ago, because it was right at the end, the edge of where they could actually get pictures from the moon.
So
Quite
you were there
phenomenal.
this week, weren't you?
Yeah, I was there this week. The dish now is 10,000 times as powerful as it was 50 years ago, and now you can actually hire it. So from around the world, astronomers can log in, and they were searching for alien life the day that we were there, so it is quite an incredible piece of technology.
Fascinating history, there it is, and we're very proud of it.
Welcome back to Weekend Sunrise. It's time for the news. Here's Sally.
Good morning. The world has marked the 50th anniversary of the lunar landing. While America's involvement is well known, Australia played a crucial role in broadcasting the pictures to hundreds of millions of people to watch across the world. Honeysuckle Creek Tracking Station and the Parkes receiving dish helped broadcast the feed to NASA, allowing 600 million people to witness the moment Apollo 11 landed and when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon.
So what we're talking to NASA about is how Australia can engage more closely on the future work that they're undertaking. So they're working on the Artemis program now, which will be their next venture to the moon. So we're talking to them about what Australia's role may well be in that program.
Weekend Sunrise with Edwina Bartholomew and Basil Zamplis.
Good morning. 50 years ago today. Welcome to Weekend Sunrise. Mon is off, so Eddie is with us this weekend, and we're just under 2 hours ago where the world marked perhaps the greatest feat of humankind, leaving our planet and landing on the moon.
It was 6:17 a.m. Australian Eastern Time, exactly 50 years since that incredible moment when the Eagle had landed, and that was beamed around the world from right here in Australia. 6 hours later, Neil Armstrong became the first person to walk on the lunar surface and, of course, uttering those immortal words which everyone now knows. And we have special live coverage for you this morning. Amelia Brace is at the Los Angeles Observatory with the way America is marking the moment. And Amber Laidler is at the Parkes dish. Let's go to you first, Amber. Today, Parkes is really remembering the role that Australia played in this huge global event.
Good morning, Eddie. Yes, that's right. The gates open here at Parkes at 9 a.m. and thousands of people have travelled to this town in the New South Wales Central West to mark this special occasion. There were 3 tracking stations simultaneously receiving signals from Apollo 11 on this day 50 years ago, and one of them was this CSIRO radio telescope here in Parkes. But it was another Australian tracking station that actually broadcast those very first steps that Neil Armstrong took on the lunar surface, and shortly after broadcast those infamous words, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Now, that Honeysuckle Creek station wasn't actually meant to be broadcasting that moment. It was believed that the tracking station in California would have the honour of broadcasting that moment. But when Apollo 11 landed on the moon surface, Neil Armstrong and his fellow astronauts made the decision that they didn't want their planned rest break, that they wanted to get straight out there on the lunar surface. It was around 8 minutes into the broadcast that the moon rose high enough that it could be picked up by this dish here at Parkes, and NASA made the decision to switch the feed, and they remained with this broadcast from Parkes for the remaining 2.5 hours of the moonwalk. That was broadcast to 600 million people across the globe. Today at 12:56 p.m. Eastern Time, the moment Neil Armstrong took that first step, they will be broadcasting that live moonwalk in live time here at the dish. Thousands of people are expected to come down and celebrate the occasion, Eddie.
Yeah, Amber, that will be very, very special indeed. You're lucky to be there. And Amelia, this was the moment 50 years ago, of course, that the US officially won the space race. How is it being remembered in the States today?
Yeah, well, that's right, Baz, and it does feel like a celebration here today. It almost feels like the 4th of July. There was a countdown across the United States to mark the moment that the Eagle actually landed. But perhaps the most poignant moment today was none other than the second man on the moon, Buzz Aldrin, returning to the Kennedy Space Center. Going to
Isn't it amazing we can get a man to the moon, but we can't cross to Amelia Brace in Los Angeles 50 years on.
No, they say that the phones that we've got now are 100 times or maybe 1,000 times more powerful than the computers that they had on board. We got it back, I think. We have. So, no, we haven't. Yes, we have. Okay.
Do continue, Amelia. Or don't. We can also
yeah, that's right, guys. You can get vision from the moon, but not always from LA.
Oh, look, we will move on. Thank you so much, Amelia. We'll come back to both Amber and Amelia soon throughout the show. And do share your memories at home if you were alive when it happened 50 years ago and have so many memories of where you were, where you watched it, who you were with. Please do share those with us this morning here on Weekend Sunrise. Much more on the anniversary throughout the morning.
8 living Apollo astronauts have gathered together for the 50th anniversary of man's first mission to the moon. At this time, 50 years ago, what a photo that is, the lunar module from Apollo 11 had been on the moon's surface for 2 hours. And inside the module, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were preparing to make more history by stepping out onto the moon's surface 6 hours later.
At Parkes in central New South Wales and at Honeysuckle Creek near Canberra, small teams of Australian scientists were getting ready to send those TV pictures to an audience of 530 million people around the world. And joining us now this morning at the CSIRO Parkes Observatory is the observatory scientist John Sarkissian and ANU astrophysicist Dr Brad Tucker. Good morning to both of you, and what is a very exciting morning. John, how are things at the Parkes Observatory this morning, and how did the screening of the dish go last night?
Well, good morning, Edwina. And yesterday went very, very well. We had perfect weather, clear skies, not a cloud in the sky, and the screening of the film, The Dish, in the paddock next to the dish was phenomenal. We had the dish tipped over, lit up, and we had several thousand people braving the winter chill, but they thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a heartwarming film, and it was just a fantastic day overall.
We can hear a little bit of wind through the microphone, which is almost perfect, isn't it? Because we know from the movie how windy it was on this day 50 years ago. Even all of these years later, with all of the stories that we know about the event, it is quite remarkable, isn't it, that dish behind you played such a significant role in this most magnanimous day for mankind, really.
It was, in fact, it was 50 years ago this hour that Neil Armstrong decided that they would start the moonwalk early, and so all of a sudden everyone suddenly thought, knew that they had to start preparing very quickly because the moonwalk was to occur sooner than expected. But everyone was ready. The weather was much worse than it is today. Today it's just gorgeous, and but 50 years ago it certainly was windy here at Parkes.
I was very lucky to tour the control room inside the dish with John just recently. And you're explaining, John, the work that the Parkes telescope is doing these days because it's much more powerful than it was 50 years ago. What does it do now?
That's it. That's right. The CSIRO Parkes telescope is arguably the finest single-dish radio telescope in the world, and it's still doing world-class science, making discoveries that are shaping our understanding of the universe. Some of the major areas of research are the study of pulsars, and we recently even discovered this enigmatic object called fast radio bursts. And it's just, we're still doing great science here, and it's still one of the finest instruments of its kind in the world.
50 years on, still getting plenty of bang for its buck. Brad, let's bring you in. We know how enthusiastic you are for all things space. How excited are you about the interest this anniversary has created? Because I think that's been the really significant thing, hasn't it? We all know about the moon landing, except for the conspiracy theorists, and we've all been...
They've been very quiet this week,
They have been, haven't they? But we've all been swept up in it, and a new generation, my 8-year-old daughter, for example, very excited to learn about what took place 50 years ago.
It has been, and I really think, as John was saying, we're able to celebrate the people here, the people who are working at Honeysuckle Creek and Tidwinbilla and Parkes, and also the small outpost of Carnarvon. We had so many people playing a role, and we've been able to tell those stories and celebrate our contribution to, as John said, probably the greatest moment in humanity, and also show what we can do, what's out there, and that nowadays there are real pathways forward for your daughter and the people out there listening that they can help when we return to the moon in a few years' time, or looking forward to landing on Mars in a decade or two.
That Apollo mission, Brad, was really such a product of that time in history, that space race between the Russians and Americans. Does it surprise you that we haven't gone back since?
No, because, it was a marathon, and then we kind of got to the finish, and it's kind of like a what now? And the Apollo missions were expensive, but it also led to us that we had a new burst of low Earth orbit exploration, the space shuttles, the space stations, and we learned a lot and did a lot. In fact, keep in mind, it was because of the space shuttle that we had the Hubble Space Telescope, which has changed literally our view of the universe. So it actually led to big things. But nowadays, now that we have this goal of Mars and we need to go back to the moon, and the moon is a lot cheaper. We were talking about India, Israel going to the moon, China landing on the moon, and also private companies get to the moon. It is a real pathway forward. Instead of just a few American males, but men, women of all countries that can actually look forward to getting there.
Sure. Brad, one of the interesting things I read about Armstrong's so famous words, we were saying it's the most famous soundbite in history, but the fact that he didn't say America, but the fact that, fact that he said mankind, he made it for everybody in the world, wherever they are. It was for all of us, not just the Americans. And that, looking back, was very, very special.
That's right. They weren't a race to the Russia. They could have said, I like to think all the Americans made it possible. No, not those Russians, right? Very could have turned into a political thing. Didn't do that. And in fact, on their flight back, they actually had a whole live broadcast recording thanking everyone in the U.S., in Australia, in Spain for helping with these missions and celebrating all of the people of the world. Again, they made it a moment of when humans unite, what we can do. And so it's been breathtaking to relive this. Well, live this. I wasn't there 50 years ago, but also seeing everyone be enthralled by what we did 50 years ago.
Well, John was there 50 years ago. He was 6 years old. John, do you feel that same sense of elation and pride, I imagine, being in charge of the Parkes dish today on this very historic day?
That's right. I was 6 years old at the time, and I was one of those 600 or so million people watching it on TV. And to be here today, to work here at the telescope where the vast majority of those pictures were received and relayed to the world is a great honour. But we should also, as Brad said, it was much more than just Parkes and Honeysuckle Creek. It was the PMG, the OTC, the Australian Department of supply. It was a truly national effort, and as Australians, I think we should all be rightly proud in the way that Australia demonstrated its expertise in space communication. We showed the world what we were capable of doing.
Yeah, quite right, and that's a standard that we've continued to live up to. Brad and John, thank you for your reflections. It is a special day. We said earlier, it feels special to be a part of it this morning, doesn't it? In our own small little way, it's significant to be on air together and reflecting on this.
And to see all those incredible pictures, not just of that moment, but also later on when they sort of danced around on the moon, sang on the moon, listened to music on the moon. I mean, they're up there for quite some time. We'll bring you those later on as well.
All the things that that could have gone wrong, and they didn't.
And they came back.
And they did come back quite. In a lot of discussion about what role Australia can take in future missions into space. The Australian Space Agency was set up a year ago, and already there are promising signs that we can build a viable and exciting space industry in this country. The agency's goal is to triple the size of the Australian space sector from a $4 billion a year industry to a $12 billion a year industry in the next 10 years. And that, if successful, would create 20,000 new jobs. So where do we find these 20,000 new jobs? And who will be filling them? Shannon McConnell and Todd Barber are from the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and they're in Australia to encourage kids to consider careers in space. Good morning to you both. Wonderful to have you in Australia on this very momentous time for all mankind, as Neil Armstrong said.
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
Shannon, you've worked with NASA JPL for 20 years. Do you get the feeling there's an unprecedented level of interest in space industries and exploration at the moment?
I believe so at the moment, yes.
Yeah, and that's because of the moon anniversary, or because of all of the things that are taking place and all of these missions that are on the table at the moment?
I think it's a combination of the moon landing anniversary is part of it, definitely, but a lot of interest has been sparked in taking humans to Mars and returning to the moon also.
And that mission, we were just talking about that earlier, but if we were successful, one day we did land a man or woman on Mars, I guess that would give us a sense of what people experienced 50 years ago with that excitement of seeing Neil Armstrong take those first steps.
Oh, absolutely.
Todd, your view, being here in Australia, how have you found the buzz that we've had around the 50-year anniversary?
Basil, it's just fantastic being here. I can't imagine a place we'd rather be, because we want to celebrate your nation today, too. You are a huge part of the success 50 years ago today. So to come here with One Giant Leap Australia to help inspire the next generation of STEM students in your country, and sure, maybe we'd like to steal some of the best and brightest for NASA, but we don't want to have a brain drain from your country. We want to see that build in your own country and become a STEM powerhouse around the world.
Well, as we were 50 years ago, glad and proud to play our role. We can lend you our best and brightest for a mission as important as these ones that we're talking about. Now, Todd, you're a jet propulsion engineer. You've worked on the Cassini mission to Saturn, Galileo mission to Jupiter, Curiosity rover that landed on Mars, and the Voyager mission. Have you got a favourite, or is that a little bit like asking you to select a favourite child?
It's exactly like that. And I will give a little shout out to Voyager, just because, again, your nation is key and instrumental for Voyager 2. You're the only nation on Earth that can track us. We're so far south now, 17 light hours away from Earth, and we rely on Deep Space Station 43 at Canberra.
You're very good.
Thank you very much.
You're very good the way you work us into the script. Thank you. Shannon, you work in educating people in the US about space missions and their benefits. What message are you bringing to Australia about the opportunities here and into the future?
The message I'm bringing is that there are endless opportunities coming down the pipe, and just follow your dreams. And pursuing a role or pursuing a career in STEM education will get you far.
Yeah. So, what sort of subjects should students be studying so that they are prepared, possibly, for a career with NASA, say?
Sure. So the traditional STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, of course, are your primary majors to study, but also we need people who are policy analysts, we need people who are financial analysts, we need people who are public relations people to be able to put the whole package of careers together and be able to propel us to our future goals.
What about the voiceover guy, Todd? You know, the T-5. I mean, are there roles like that available? I feel eminently qualified for that.
Oh, yeah, I think you'd be great, Basil. And there's tons of opportunities like that as well. And it's just so exciting to see Curious and One Giant Leap Australia and what they're doing in your nation, bringing us down here. We have a giant festival in Wagga next weekend, and we just can't wait to interface more with the Australian public about this special, amazing gift of exploring the heavens.
So the Artemis program is up and running and gets humans back onto the moon by 2024. That's the plan. And there's talk about a manned mission to Mars in 2033. Would you anticipate Australia will have a role to play in those missions?
I would think definitely, and especially as your nascent space program gets on its feet, we're very excited to witness this and watch the birth of your space program. It's just so exciting. And one thing that may happen here to fire up kids, there very well be a Space Camp Australia coming. So stay tuned with that. There's exciting announcements as far as partnering with industry and the military here in your nation.
We've had 2 Australian astronauts, as we know. They've had wonderful careers and they were part of significant space exploration. So I guess the message here is for young Australians who are watching right now and they've looked at the stars and they've dreamt of maybe one day being an astronaut, what we're saying is that is a very real possibility. Those opportunities do exist. It's not pie in a very big sky.
It's not, no. It's definitely an achievable goal.
Did you always want to work for the agency?
I did. As an 8th grade boy, as soon as I saw the pictures of Jupiter and Saturn in National Geographic magazine, I knew that JPL was my destiny, Jet Propulsion Laboratory and NASA. And now to actually be on that very mission, Voyager, that inspired me as a teenage boy, I can't believe my good fortune.
And very fine. How special is today for both of you?
Very special. It's a very exciting day, yeah.
I can't believe it's been 50 years. Shannon and I are far too young to remember the moon landing, but you know, we celebrate and can't wait to watch the dish again today and celebrate your role in that historic day.
We feel very connected by it. There's no doubt our 2 countries very well connected already, but obviously what happened 50 years ago today is so significant. Thanks for being here. Thank you for sharing that positive message. There are opportunities for our Australians as well. Good on you guys.
Our pleasure. Thank you.